Okay, so here's what I know about the Black Yamasee indigenous, the Black Yamasee Indians. Okay, so Yamasee was a mixture of a lot of different tribes, indigenous tribes. Okay, and they also took in African Americans. Now, the Yamasee were also involved in some of the slave trading too. Okay, now here, and I don't know too much about the Yamasee, but I do know that they adopted in African Americans. Okay. This happened a lot across the South. And you got to remember, the South is where African Americans were born. Okay. The South. Like when I say we were born, this is where the majority of us come from. The South, the Southern United States of America. In the Southern United States of America, there were a lot of indigenous tribes. There were a lot. And one of them was the Yamasee. Well, the Yamasee was involved in some of the trading, right? But they also adopted some African Americans into there. So they were there into their tribe, meaning that they were Yamasee at that point. Okay. Here's the thing. All right. Here's the thing. There was a Yamasee war. And I'm not too detailed about it, but what was so interesting about the war is that they weren't getting along with the British settlers that came through, because the British settlers, they weren't keeping their word. They were trying to encroach on the land, the Yamasee land, and the Yamasee ain't like that. They didn't like that at all. So I believe what happened is that a lot of the other tribes got with the Yamasee. There was a Yamasee war. This was in the 1700s. There was a Yamasee war. Not just the other indigenous tribes. There were African Americans in there too. Basically what we now know as Black Indians. Yeah, because they were adopted over into the Yamasee. See how that works? So yes, there is African ancestry. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so we have groups and groups of indigenous fighting against the British, right? The settlers. Okay, so they were in there and they were like, "You're not gonna take our land." Yamasee was like, "No." Here's how the Yamasee lost. I think they would have won. Okay, against the British, against the white folk, right? They would have won because it was a lot of the tribes together plus us. You know what I'm saying? So, bam. Okay, they would have won except the Cherokee Nation. The Cherokee Nation sided with the white folk. And when you have an alliance with the Cherokee who know the land and who know the other tribes, guess what? It gives the British an advantage. See that? So while the Yamasee and all the rest of the ones who was fighting with them were doing their best and their hardest, and they put up a good fight. If you look it up, this was the turning point in the war, because the Cherokee and the Yamasee didn't get along. See that? And so they sided with the white folk. And that was one major reason why the Yamasee lost. Now, what happened to the Yamasee as a whole tribe? I'm not sure what happened to the Yamasee. A lot of them. Now, I remember talking to this one indigenous man, and he was talking about, and this was a long time ago, and he was telling me how some of them had to hide who they were. And it's written about that some of the Yamasee had to do that. They had to hide who they were for fear of death. Or they would go and absorb themselves into another indigenous nation. So I'm not sure how it all went down. But again, there were African Americans again in with those tribes. So whether they were half or whether they were adopted into the tribe, there was African ancestry. And that's one of the big stories of the Yamasee, if I'm pronouncing it right, the Yamasee. Yes, there were what we now know as Black Indians or Black Indigenous. Yes, and they did have African ancestry. And they were a part of that war, too. When I say African Americans literally fought in just about every battle here in the United States of America on this land, like since the time we got here, yeah, we did. It's just not gonna be in the books. It's not gonna be in the books.